In a major escalation, U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz following the collapse of peace talks with Iran. U.S. Central Command said it will begin implementing the blockade on all maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports on April 13th, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Tuesday, 7:30 a.m. India time. Now remember, this move comes after recent talks in Islamabad, which, according to the U.S. president, had gone well, but ultimately failed over Tehran's refusal to give up its nuclear ambitions and reopen the critical oil route. Now, Donald Trump also threatened China with steep tariffs if it provides military support to Iran. The development marks a sharp turn in the conflict, raising fears of wider disruption to global energy supplies and a possible expansion of the crisis.
President Donald Trump ordered the U.S. military to blockade the Strait of Hormuz after marathon talks with Iran wrapped up on Sunday with no deal to end the war. In a social media post, Trump said he also told the Navy to, quote, seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. It came after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance announced the failed result in Pakistan's capital, where the talks were held.
We've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement.
Both sides blamed each other for the failed negotiations. Vance said Iran chose not to accept American terms, including on nuclear arms.
The simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will.
The talks in Islamabad came after a ceasefire was agreed earlier in the week. They were the first direct U.S.-Iranian meeting in over a decade and the highest level since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Bagher said the two sides reached an understanding on some issues, but remained far apart on a few key matters. However, he told Iranian media that diplomacy would continue. He described an atmosphere of mistrust and said it was natural that an agreement could not be reached in a single session.
For the entire region and
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar urged the two sides to uphold the two-week truce.
Commitment to ceasefire.
He said his country would continue to facilitate engagement to try and end the fighting that has killed thousands and sent global oil prices soaring since it began over 6 weeks ago. During the talks that started on Saturday, 3 supertankers carrying oil, along with some commercial vessels, passed through the Strait of Hormuz, shipping data showed. They appear to be the first oil tankers to exit the Gulf since the ceasefire deal. Hundreds of vessels are still stuck there.
Remember, the U.S. Central Command will begin implementing the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz from April 13th, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 7:30 a.m. India time tomorrow, targeting all vessels entering or exiting Iranian ports and coastal areas. Now, the enforcement will apply to ships of all nations covering key Iranian ports along the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. However, the U.S. says it will not disrupt freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz for vessels heading to or from non-Iranian ports. Now, commercial shipping has been advised to stay alert, with mariners asked to monitor official notices and remain in contact with U.S. naval forces while operating in the region. Now, the move marks a significant escalation in the conflict, even as tensions remain high following the breakdown of ceasefire talks in Pakistan. And Iran's delegation left Pakistan on Sunday after marathon talks with the United States failed to produce a breakthrough. Iranian Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf maintained that Tehran country will not surrender under any threats. Now, Ghalibaf, who led Tehran's negotiations at the weekend talks with Washington in Pakistan's capital city, taunted the U.S. president over petrol prices and amid Washington's vow to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. He posted on X an image appearing to show prices per gallon at gas stations in the White House area. He wrote, and I quote, "Enjoy the current pump figures. With the so-called blockade soon, you'll be nostalgic for the $4 to $5 gas." Now, earlier, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Bagher confirmed that while there were areas of understanding, key differences remained unresolved.
در مورد یک سری از موضوعات ما به تفاهم‌هایی رسیدیم واقعیت اما در مورد دو سه موضوع مهم خب دیدگاه‌ها فاصله داشت و نهایتاً منجر به توافق نشد این گفتگوها. این آخرین وضعیت هست که
And let's go deeper into those proposed nostalgic $4 to $5 per gallon of oil. U.S. consumer prices have surged sharply in the month of March, recording their biggest increase in nearly 4 years as the Iran war has pushed up oil prices and tariffs have continued to feed into those costs. Now, data shows inflation jumped close to 1% for the month, driven largely by a massive spike in fuel prices, especially gasoline or petrol.
A closely watched inflation report on Friday showed that U.S. consumer prices in March rose by the most in nearly 4 years, as the war with Iran led to a record surge in gasoline prices. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index jumped 0.9% last month, the largest increase since June 2022, when prices soared in response to the Russia-Ukraine war. March's increase was in line with economists' expectations, but marked a significant leap from February's 0.3% rise. It also put the annual inflation rate at 3.3%, nearly a full percentage point higher than February's year-over-year gain. Fueling the price surge, a record 21.2% jump in gasoline prices, which accounted for nearly 3/4 of the CPI increase.
It's quite significant.
Stephen Cates is a financial analyst with Bankrate.
When we look at gas prices in particular, this is where things really stand out. As a percentage change over a single month, this is the largest since this data was tracked back in 1967.
The so-called core CPI, however, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, rose a modest 0.2% in March after advancing the same amount in February. That put the annual core inflation rate at 2.6%. Still, economists expect the Middle East war to lift core prices in the months ahead, as expensive jet fuel will likely raise airline fares and diesel will increase the cost of goods transported by road. Prices of fertilizer and plastics, among other goods, are also expected to rise. Elevated inflation has led some economists to predict that the Federal Reserve will not lower interest rates this year, a belief that was reinforced this week by the release of minutes from the central bank's March policy meeting, which showed a growing group of policymakers felt that rate hikes might be needed instead.
US President Donald Trump has issued a sharp warning to China, threatening steep tariffs if Beijing provides military support to Iran. Speaking in an interview, Trump said Chinese goods entering the United States could face tariffs as high as 50% if Beijing supports Iran militarily, calling it a staggering penalty. Now, the warning adds a new dimension to the ongoing West Asia conflict, raising the risk of a broader geopolitical and economic confrontation. Despite the tensions, Trump is still scheduled to visit China next month for talks with President Xi Jinping on a range of bilateral issues. Now, the meeting had earlier been delayed due to the Iran war, but now comes at a time of heightened stakes, both on the battlefield and in global trade.